Good morning and welcome to the Foster Swift Sports Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dave Russell. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Charlie Sarche and Tony Delamonte. Today we're joined by General Manager Cole Moore with the Michigan State football team. Cole is a 2014 graduate of Montana State, where he also earned his master's in intercollegiate athletic leadership. Actually, he earned that from Washington in 2016. Spent 6 years at Montana State and began his tenure with the Bobcats serving as the football administrative assistant, then was promoted to director of football operations, assistant athletic director for football operations, and ultimately chief of staff. He spent 2015 and 16 at Washington as a football recruiting graduate assistant, was at Texas in 2021 where he developed and implemented recruiting changes, camp direction, schedule coordination, and recruitment operation support. He was named Oregon State's Director of Player Personnel in February 2022. And Cole joined Coach Jonathan Smith's staff here in East Lansing in December 2023 as the Spartans General Manager. Cole oversees all aspects of roster management and directly oversees recruiting strategies for the Spartans. Cole, welcome.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're looking forward to talking to you. And, I guess my first question to you is just, what is a general manager? What do you really do?
Yeah, so I think it's probably different from school to school across the country. But I'd say my duties here, number one, is I'm in charge of hiring and managing our recruiting and personnel staff. So we're in the process of actually hiring 2 new guys right now. So when we get those 2 guys hired, we'll have a full-time staff of, it'll be about 9 people. Then we have an army of student interns that help us out as well. So I'm kind of tasked with overseeing that. And making sure we're clicking on all cylinders with everything we're doing in recruiting and personnel. And then aside from that, kind of the bigger piece of the pie is managing the NIL and the revenue sharing and being the main point of contact for agents, players, their families, trainers, whoever's handling their situation. I'm kind of the front door to that aspect of the program.
Sure. And that's all new, the NIL and rev share thing. So can you just explain a little bit what revenue sharing is exactly?
Yeah, so we could go into this for a while. Yeah. but in short, revenue sharing now it's legal for athletic departments to compensate our student athletes directly instead of having to go through a third-party collective, which in our case the past couple of years has been Spartan Nation. Now, there's a lot going on right now. I'm sure you guys have seen the last couple of days.
Right, yeah, a lot of changes.
Some changes and some pushback to the original legislation.
Yep.
But yeah, on its face, it's revenue sharing as athletic departments being able to compensate our student athletes directly.
In terms of revenue sharing, can you explain a little bit maybe behind the scenes for people? There was a number that was thrown out, I think, in a lot of articles whenever this finally got approved. But behind the scenes, how does it work? Are you just told what the dollar amount is that you have for football? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so yes, to answer your question. So whether it was Spartan Nation Collective or whether it's now revenue sharing, the football program is told, okay, Coach Smith, Cole, coaching staff, this is your budget to operate within, okay? And then it's up to us as a football program to decide how to manage that across all 85 guys on scholarship and then now all 105 guys that we're allowed to have on the roster. And we're actually allowed to have 115 on the roster this year. But moving forward, we're going to have to get down to 105. But yes, we're managing that revenue share pot across all 115 guys that we're expecting to have on our roster this year.
So are you kind of like that Moneyball guy, which is one of my favorite movies? Are you like the Billy Bean of Michigan State where you're deciding, okay, this is how we're going to allocate that $15 million?
Yeah, it's a collaborative effort. By no means do I do it by myself. Like Coach Smith, it's his football program, so he's very involved in how we do everything, and the coaches are involved to a certain degree as well. But at the end of the day, with whatever our budget is, we decide, okay, each position group, we're going to allocate X amount of that budget to each position group. And we're going to try to stay within that framework as best we can, knowing that it's not always going to be perfect, right? Like if you have a first-team All-American running back, like you're probably going to have to compensate that individual more than maybe you would if you just had a good player, right? So there's outliers to everything. but we do want to have an initial framework that we try to work within. And a lot of it comes down to how we want to win, right? Like under Coach Smith and our staff, like we want to run the football and we want to stop the run. Like those are two core beliefs on offense and defense. So we're going to invest pretty heavily in the offensive line because we have to be good up front to play the style of football we want to play.
So are you meeting almost weekly, especially as fall camps are getting started? Are you meeting almost weekly with coaching staffs to kind of talk about players' values, stuff like that, and going forward? How players are doing, you know?
Yeah, so during fall camp, throughout the season, we do have those conversations on like how guys are doing. But when it comes to the exact amounts that we're going to allocate the guys, those discussions don't really happen until like postseason or post-spring ball, like when all the work is done and we have a full body of work that we've been able to evaluate amongst our players. That's really when we have those firm discussions, but we're constantly evaluating everything. Like we'll watch as a recruiting staff, myself, our personnel staff, we'll watch every practice. Like we can sit in on meetings with our coaches when they're watching practice. So we have that ability to constantly evaluate and assess where every guy in our program is at in terms of their on-field performance. Because on-field performance, yes, that's probably the most important thing, but there's a lot of different aspects of our program that our guys are doing every day, right? They're interacting with our strength coach, our nutrition, our training staff, our academic staff. So we're constantly evaluating everything because, you know, when we're dealing with this amount of money now, like these are big decisions, right? Mm-hmm. And we have to make sure we're being the best stewards of those resources as we can. So we really want to reward guys that are doing everything correctly in every aspect of our program. But all that being said, on-field performance, that's going to be the number one driver of how we allocate the resources.
I feel like that's a big change. You know, you've been on the coaching or front office side for about 10 years now. I feel like you know, player personnel individuals wouldn't be breaking down film, but now you guys are, you know, you're using what resources you have at your disposal to make these decisions so they're not made in the dark. They're educated decisions. It's kind of just an interesting change on where we've come in the last 10 years.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, this is a historical and transformational time in college athletics, and I think it's probably overdue in terms of college athletes being compensated, especially football and men's basketball players, because I mean, those two sports, they're driving 99% of the revenue for athletic departments, right?
Right.
So those student athletes should receive a piece of, you know, what we're generating as athletic departments. But it's added this business component, a business element, to where it used to be just, hey, you got 85 scholarships, manage your scholarships, and you weren't dealing with this whole big other equation, which I don't want to say unfortunately, but like that part of it drives a lot of decision making for young men and their families, and that's okay. But we just have to manage it as best we can.
And it seems like the valuation will get easier maybe as the years go, because you'll have something to look back on to say, okay, this is how we've done it in the past, but this is all brand new, right?
Yeah, it's very, very new. I mean, starting back in 2021 when NIL was passed, name, image, and likeness, like the original intent of NIL was for young men to seek out deals with businesses or local car dealerships, right? It was supposed to be organic, right? Or those people reaching out to these student athletes. But it quickly got hijacked and manipulated into these collectives, right? And that's the space we've been living in since 2021 is these collectives. And now they're trying to close that loophole a little bit as we enter into this revenue share. But the collective space, it remains to be seen how much collectives are still going to be able to operate. Because I don't know if you saw, I mentioned it earlier, there's been a lot of pushback from collectives and the plaintiff lawyers that they want collectives to still be able to operate, right? So I'm not going to name schools that I know like have high functioning collectives, but if you're a school that does have one, right, that's a severe competitive advantage. You don't want to lose your competitive advantage, right? If you have money to spend, you want to be able to spend your collective money and you want to be able to spend revenue share money. But a school that maybe doesn't have as active as a collective, like, yeah, they probably want that to go away so the playing field can be more level and everyone's just operating off the revenue share. So a lot of that's still going to continue to play out over the next 6 months to a year.
Are you guys still working with Spartan Nation, the collective, at all?
As of now, we aren't, but I don't know exactly what it's going to look like moving forward.
Okay.
I know we just hired a new athletic director. I'm sure he might have some opinions and thoughts on how we approach that space moving forward, and donors and boosters, and it's kind of outside of my scope there. But I do foresee, I think you're going to need a collective to continue to be as competitive as it can. Because I think if you just rely on revenue sharing moving forward, other people are going to be using collectives, and you may fall behind a little bit.
Sure.
Well, and it seems like the intent, at least from my view, with the House versus the NCAA settlement agreement, was we were going to have this revenue share, and it was going to, pay players their value, and it was going to equal the playing field. But what you just described really is a situation where the schools are paying revenue sharing, but the collectives can put any number on top of that. There's really no limit on that. Is that right?
So that's kind of the part to remain to be seen. I think it's going to be much more tightened up than it has been the past 3 or 4 years. So I don't think it's going to be like, you've heard the term the Wild Wild West, right? Like the first 3 years of NIL and collectives, that's what it has been, right? No collective is created equal, right? A school in the West Coast collective might have double the money that a Big Ten school in the Midwest have, right? So that's a big gap, right, in terms of the resources you have to allocate to players or recruiting and retention. So I think ideally we're moving towards a space where collectives, they're going to be tightened up, but they're still going to function. But to what degree, that remains to be seen, in my opinion.
Okay. How has it been working with Jay Batt, Michigan State's new athletic director? How involved is he in what you do?
Yeah, it's been positive so far. I was involved in one meeting with him kind of early on, and it was really positive. You can tell he's a sharp individual, sharp guy. Just in the, I think it was like an hour meeting I was involved in with him, and you can tell he's got his stuff together, and he has a lot of experience that I'm looking forward to him bringing to Michigan State and seeing how he can help elevate not just football but all sports in our athletic department.
Mm-hmm. What about Jonathan Smith too? We had a couple of your players, Brady Pretzlaff and AJ Dennis, on a couple weeks ago, and they spoke really highly of him and said that he's really navigating this, the balancing the locker room culture between focusing on NIL and just playing hard for your team. So I guess what about Jonathan Smith made you want to come over to East Lansing?
Yeah, so I'll kind of give you a quick history of my relationship with Coach Smith. So when I was at Washington back in 2015 as a recruiting graduate assistant, I was working with our defensive line coach at the time, but Coach Smith was the offensive coordinator. So I kind of bumped into him occasionally, so he kind of knew who I was, I knew who he was. That was kind of how he knew of me. Then after Washington, I went to Montana State, went to Texas, and then when I was at Texas, Coach Smith had gone to Oregon State, and he had an opening for their director of player personnel role. And I was kind of connected with that tree of coaches, the Coach Peterson tree of coaches from his time at Washington. So my name kind of came to Coach Smith's desk, and then he called me and had a couple conversations, and it was kind of a no-brainer for me to go back up to the Pacific Northwest and work for him. And really working for him at Oregon State, that was the first time really extensively working with him on a day-to-day basis. And I think the most unique thing about Coach Smith, and one of the best things about him, is that if he were just to walk down the street or see him in the airport, he blends in. He wants to be a normal guy. And I think people really appreciate that. And one of his sayings is low ego, high output. And I think he lives that to a T. Yes, he's the head coach at Michigan State, and don't mistake, he's very competitive. Maybe that's not as outward facing towards the public, but inside the walls, he's very competitive. And there is a high standard in our building, not just for our players, but for our staff, our recruiting staff, everyone in the building. There's a high standard to perform. So Coach Smith is very competitive, but you don't always see that in a public-facing way.
It's a real contrast to kind of what we've seen.
So I had a question. So did you have a moment where you knew you wanted to stay in football, stay in college football? Because you played at Montana State, you're a captain linebacker. I was looking up your stats. It was something like you played 38 straight games. Did you have a moment either while you were in college or after where you're like, yep, this is what I want my career to be?
Yeah. So after I got done playing, I had a semester off. I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? Right. I think that moment hits you, and you don't really expect that moment to ever come, but it does. So I had a semester off. I was actually working at an airport in Montana, trying to figure out what was next. And I knew, like, after that first week of not having any structure, right, I didn't have any football responsibilities. I didn't have a schedule that I had to adhere to. I was like, oh, this is different. I don't like it. So I knew that I wanted to get back involved in college athletics in some fashion. So I kind of found that program at the University of Washington to get my master's in intercollegiate athletic leadership. So that's how I got back into it. And then as part of my program, I had to do a year-long internship, and I got involved with the football program through some connections from the Montana State coaching staff to Washington staff. And then that's how I got thrust into it in the recruiting role. Then from there, it's, once you get your foot in the door, then it's really on you from there, right? Because in this profession, it's all about people and relationships, and who trusts you, and who will vouch for you as coaches move on, right? Coaches are the ones that are doing the hirings of support staff. So that's kind of how I got into it, to answer your question. But I'm glad I did, because I can't imagine my life without college football in it, or some aspect of football in it. Sure. There'd be a huge void.
Was the original thought you were going to go into coaching?
I never wanted to get into coaching. The thing I didn't have to be a coach was I didn't love the X's and O's. Like, I didn't love being on the whiteboard and drawing up formations. And
you just liked hitting people.
Yeah, yes. I like being physical. I love the game. I love the competitive aspect of it. I love the work. I love being part of a team. But when it came to, like, the X's and the O's and drawing up formations and plays, like, that wasn't my forte. I didn't love that. But just being in a college environment and college football atmosphere, especially at the highest level that we are here at Michigan State, like, that fuels a fire in you. And when you can't play, like, this is the closest thing to it. So
sure. Yeah, I think we feel the same. I mean, as attorneys that have tried to carve out a little piece of sports law into our practices now, I think we kind of feel that same way.
Mm-hmm. This is more fun.
Yeah,
absolutely.
On the recruiting side, you've worked in recruiting for a while. How has the recruiting pitch or philosophy changed in terms of high school recruits and transfers now? Because with transfers now, you mentioned that you're going to be analyzing a body of work for the money side of things, and we see guys who are spending 3 years really productive at smaller schools who are landing in their senior or graduate senior years at bigger schools. So how has that sort of philosophy changed since you got into it?
Yeah, so I think to answer your question, we look at it like this, is like there's 3 different buckets of people that you're constantly managing, right? You have your current roster, which is the biggest portion of it, right? You want to retain your best players, okay? And then you have high school recruiting, which is a big component as well, and then you have the transfer recruiting, right? So there's 3 different areas that you're constantly evaluating and assessing. And based on your evaluation of your current roster, that's going to drive your decisions and your needs in high school and transfer recruiting. So, back in the day when there was no transfer portal, like, it was all high school recruiting and junior college recruiting. But then with the transfer portal now, like, it allows you to fill holes faster, right? Because, like I said, we're constantly evaluating our roster. And if we're looking at a position group and we're looking at it and say, hey, I don't think we're going to be quite competitive enough or talented enough in that room to put the best product on the field next year, like, we're going to hold a scholarship and NIL revenue share resources for that spot for the transfer portal. So that's where it goes back to this, like, knowing your roster in and out and always assessing it. That drives your decisions and how you predict the future. Because our jobs as personnel and recruiting staff, Like the 2025 season, like that's done for us. Like we have no control over the 2025 season now. That's all the players and the coaches, right? But we're looking at 2026 now. Like we're preparing for that with our high school recruiting, and then, like I said, constantly assessing our current roster. Like as we go through fall camp and we identify, we might not be quite talented enough in this room as a guy or two finishes up their eligibility. I don't think we're going to want to take another freshman at linebacker. We might need to hold a spot for an older guy because there might be a gap in the talent or the growth in that room to where we need an older guy to be ready to play in 2026.
Do you tend to prioritize good players from the transfer portal more than high school recruits, or is it kind of 50-50?
It kind of just depends, like I said, on what we think our needs are. Ideally, we don't want to have to rely on the transfer portal. And that goes back to high school recruiting. Like, you want to have minimal misses in high school recruiting. If you miss, then that leaves gaps in your roster, right? Because if you miss on character, if you miss on skill evaluation, like that's gonna show up at some point. And when it does show up, we're gonna say, oh, we're not talented enough right there now. And it's gonna be really hard to go then say, hey, let's just fill that with another young guy, a freshman. Because oftentimes freshmen aren't ready to go, especially like at the line of scrimmage, right? So that's where you have to constantly be assessing it and be ready to fill those needs on your roster with transfer portal guys or just older guys in general.
From a value standpoint, then, does the transfer portal, a guy that's proven it's played, let's say, at a Toledo or some other MAC school, did they have a higher value than a guy coming out of high school that hasn't shown himself at in the college ranks?
Yeah, absolutely. Guys that have proven tape at the college level, they're going to be highly sought after, right? Because there's proof, there's evidence that they are capable of doing it at a high level against elite competition or really good competition. And not saying that freshmen can't do it, but it's more of a risk, more of a gamble as a program to put all your eggs in a freshman. As opposed to someone where you can see there's evidence that they're producing at the college level. And if we're taking note of that, you can be dang sure other programs across the country are too. So those prospects are going to be more highly sought after, which is going to make their recruitments even more competitive. And that's where you can get into bidding wars, right? It's like when there's multiple schools that really want a player, they have a need at, say, offensive tackle, like that's a really highly sought after position, right? If there's 4 or 5 teams that have a need there, and we're all centered on the same handful of guys, like it's going to be a competitive market for that player.
Sure.
In terms of good.
I was just wondering. So, a big part of recruiting visits now, as I understand it, is they come and have a meeting with you to talk numbers. I mean, how do those meetings go? What kind of things do you prioritize in those meetings?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I lead with is education, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and not everyone has the same degree of understanding of all these changes and where we're at right now in college football. So I always start with educating people on how we got to where we are today in college football and where we're going and how it impacts them. Because I think the number one thing people need to have is knowledge. Like, knowledge is power. If you don't have knowledge, you can't stand up for yourself or be educated in the space, and you have to have that to know what's going on. Because the last thing you want to do is be taken advantage of, and that's not what we want to do, and we don't want to have our players be taken advantage of. So it always starts with education. But as I go through that, the last thing we finish with, right, is presenting a number or an offer to a young man and his family or his agent or whoever's helping them out with that. And those decisions, like I said, those are collaborative decisions that the coaching staff is involved in to some degree. Then Coach Smith, of course, is involved in that. And then, I play a part in that too. But in those meetings, that's where we present the players with a firm offer of where we're at financially.
Are you seeing more players show up with agents, lawyers, et cetera? And would you recommend that players do that?
Yeah, so it's definitely becoming more common. I'd say on our team right now, we're probably getting close to half of the roster having representation, which is a large portion, right? And then Transfers, pretty much every transfer, if they have production at the college level, they have an agent. Because agents, right, their agents want to represent the best players usually, right? So throughout the course of the year, what are agents doing? Agents are tracking who's being the most productive, and then agents are reaching out to these kids, DMs, texts, whatever, trying to represent those players if they don't always already have representation, because they want to represent the best players, right? Sure. So yes, agents are becoming more of a factor, and personally, I would recommend getting an agent. Part of me says I don't want to say that because it's just more work. It's a lot to manage. But for the student athlete and the family, I think it's better to have someone who handles it and can have those conversations, because let's be real, those conversations aren't always fun, right? Hopefully most of them are. Hopefully the football program, Michigan State, and the young man and their family can come to an agreement on where we're at financially. But there are times where there's disconnect there, right? And those conversations aren't always pleasant and easy. So having an agent that can kind of be in the middle there and can manage that, I think is very beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, and not to disclose too much of anything, but we've worked with you, Cole, a little bit on stuff like that, and we think you've been great to work with. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like my job is to represent Michigan State football to the best of my ability. And like I said, it's not me. Like, I don't speak for myself. I represent everyone in our program, and especially like Coach Smith and our coaching staff, because let's be honest too, like, I don't decide who plays on Saturdays, right? Like, I can give an opinion, but the coaching staff decides who's running out there when we play against Western Michigan on August 30th, right? And they decide who plays throughout the year. So who plays, like, we're going to invest and reward guys that are playing and performing, right? And that's my job to kind of figure that out, is to kind of how to manage those resources accordingly based on who is playing and who is performing, who is producing. And even if there's young men that aren't playing right now, like if they're on an upward trajectory, like we're going to want to be proactive and invest in those guys, even if they're not playing now, but we're pretty dang confident that they are in the next year or two.
So what's the process once you come to a negotiated agreement with, you know, a recruit or a transfer athlete? Are they signing a contract? What does that look like?
Yeah, so right now what it looks like is, say, you know, this freshman class that we just we haven't signed them yet, obviously, but we have a good number of commitments, right? We had a lot of official visits throughout the summer.
Right.
So when there is an agreement made on that end, what it looks like is we can't put anything on paper until August 1st. So everything right now, it's a verbal understanding and agreement between Michigan State football and that young man and his family representation. And then starting August 1st, we can put things on paper to make it kind of more real in a sense. But even then, they aren't eligible to sign that until they sign their aid agreement, their scholarship, on signing day, which I think this year is December 3rd. So everything is really a verbal understanding and agreement, and even the young men, they're verbally committing to Michigan State. It's not binding, right? It's not binding till they sign in the dotted line on December 3rd. Then once they sign their aid agreement on December 3rd, then they can sign officially the revenue share agreement with Michigan State.
And so, and we've seen this, but you know, for our listeners, what is a revenue sharing agreement setting forth other than, you know, obviously the compensation? Is that saying, okay, you're licensing or you're contracting your name, image, and likeness rights to Michigan State? Is that what that's doing?
Yep, correct. And a lot of that stuff, like what's in the contracts, a lot of that is driven at the conference level, and then the institutions do have the ability to make slight changes to that, and that's kind of above me. I'm not really involved in that. So like our general counsel on campus, they're involved in that. Our compliance department, the athletic administration, they're kind of involved in the nuances of the contract language. When it comes to the stuff you guys are way more familiar with than I am, I'm not really too involved in that.
Sure.
In terms of advice that you would give either to your current players or, you know, when you're talking to recruits, this is a lot to manage as a 17-year-old kid who's coming into a Big Ten program, physically there are demands. You're going to college for the first time. I mean, what advice do you give to kids coming in and how they manage all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I try to put myself in their shoes as well sometimes, and you're right. Like when you step foot on the college campus, like there's so many things that are new and that are thrown at you. And I think sometimes people forget, I forget too, is like these guys are still going to class. Like they're trying to get a degree in education, and that's not easy, right? Going to college isn't easy. And then on top of that, yes, you have the rigors of being a Big Ten football player, which there's inherent pressure in that, right, to perform. But now you have this whole other piece of it where there's a financial aspect of it, and that can probably create anxiety, right, for young men. Because at the end of the day, this has turned into more of a business. And if you're a young man, you have only a finite amount of time in a college football program, and you want to maximize everything. Maximize your education, maximize your performance on the field, and with that, maximize the financial incentives that are out there. So everyone wants to get as much as they can during their time. But I think it can sometimes become a distraction. When you let that become the main focus, or you're constantly worried about that, other things in your life may slip, right? So that kind of goes back to, I forget who asked it. I think there is benefit in having representation so someone can deal with that and have those conversations, so the student athlete can focus on getting a degree and being the best football player they can.
Yeah, Tony, take your situation. You walk on in Michigan, back in the day, and during that time, you didn't have revenue sharing. There wasn't NIL, and if you did transfer somewhere, you had to sit out a year. But fast forward today, if you were doing that, you may look at that and say, "Oh, I'm going to go play for Central, and then I'm going to get on the field, and then I'm going to try to go to a Michigan State or a Michigan." At that point, it's for a high school kid, it seems like it's a much different world in a lot of ways. Not just the money, but maybe the decisions you're making. You're making a lot of adult decisions, and you need to look forward a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much into it, and like you said, it starts at a young age. Like some of these financial conversations with recruits are happening when they're still 16 years old. I mean, that's a lot to be thrown at you, and especially if you're an elite player, there's going to be a certain range of money maybe being discussed with you, and if you've never been exposed to that before, that can be pretty eye-opening and shocking. And how do I deal with that? That's a lot, while still trying to be a high school student, right, and enjoying that. So I definitely empathize with young men, but at the same time too, like it's a privilege to be able to maximize your financial earnings, because like you see it with some of our players now, like they're buying houses, they're buying cars, they're investing in it in stocks, they're setting up future kids for college tuition. Like there's incredible things that you can do with the money you're able to make as a big-time college football player. But with that, like we talked about, there can be a lot of distraction. So trying to stay focused on the main thing, that can be a challenge.
I did have a question on the transfer portal. So you see a lot of times the guys who transfer and the big numbers thrown around, but I think what gets missed is the kids who enter the transfer portal either because they're not playing or they don't have a good relationship with the coach, who don't get picked up. And I think there are a lot out there. So what are those conversations like? And I don't know if it's either with you or with the coaching staff where, you've got a guy on the team who is dissatisfied, might be looking at transferring. I guess what's the pitch, or what conversations are you guys having internally to either convince a guy to stay or either just, make the best decision for that young man?
Yeah, so I think that kind of goes to player retainment, right? And I think that's a critical portion of this now, is like constantly having a feel for where guys are at on your team, right? Because the last thing you want to do is be surprised, okay? When the transfer portal comes, you think everyone's good, you're probably naive, right? As you go through the season and guys maybe aren't playing as much as they thought they were, or maybe they've been disgruntled about maybe the financial part of their experience in the program. Make no mistake, guys are doing things with their agents or themselves, like they're thinking about their next step. and so are we too, right? That goes back to us constantly evaluating our roster. Like if there is a guy that's underperforming or we don't think maybe has a future in our program, like we're constantly saying, okay, how are we going to replace this young man? Okay. And it goes for the same for the student athlete. Like everyone's trying to constantly evaluate where they're at. And like you said, there are instances where young men go into the portal and they don't have a plan. Like that's the last thing I would ever recommend to anyone is you got to have a plan if you're going into the portal, especially if you're a guy that hasn't produced, you don't have proven tape, and you're going to take a chance and just say, hey, I'm going to go into the portal and see what happens. There's maybe a good chance that you don't get an opportunity. And that's the last thing you want to do is throw away an education that's being paid for, right? So there's a lot of layers to that, and that goes back to why it's important to maybe have representation, because agents can work that on the side if they know their client is not happy and they want to make a change. The agent can be proactive and doing that like during the season. They can be reaching out to other schools, other general managers at other schools and say, hey, my client might be looking to make a change after the season. Would you guys be interested, right? So that's kind of how that works. So if you're going to go into the portal, you better have a plan.
So most of the contracts that we've seen have been a year. I've seen some that are 18 months, but that typically you're looking at basically a one-year free agent. You know, do you expect that will continue, or do you expect that we're going to see multi-year contracts become a thing?
It's hard to say. I've definitely heard more of multi-year deals happening. I think a lot of that's going to be driven by athletic departments. I think football programs will have a say and maybe put their opinion in there. But at the end of the day, I think those are going to be athletic department decisions on whether we're comfortable issuing multi-year deals. Because I think the biggest thing with multi-year deals right now and how it's set up is like all these contracts are pretty much fully guaranteed, whether they're a year or year and a half or 2 years, right? And if I was a student athlete, I'd probably want that. Like, that's a pretty good assurance, right? But like on our end as a university with the transfer portal, yeah, we're going to issue a fully guaranteed contract for 18 months, but there's no guarantee that you're going to be here in 6 months because of the transfer portal, unless there's language written in the contract saying, hey, if you go in the portal, you have to pay back a certain percentage or whatever it is. But that goes back to where we are right now in college athletics. There's not a lot of uniformity in terms of even the contracts from school to school. So that's an inherent challenge in itself. So there's a lot of layers to that. But I do think there's probably going to be a push for 2-year deals. Like if I was a student athlete, I'd probably want that. But a lot of it's going to depend on what athletic departments are comfortable with doing.
Yeah, and maybe to piggyback on that, do you think that the current state of NIL is going to evolve into collective bargaining at some point?
I think I don't know if it will. I think it should. In my opinion, like to make college football as equitable and make it a competitive balance, like, and I've thought about this so many times, like, why doesn't everyone want to have like a salary cap, the same salary cap? Let's make this even, competitive across the board. So it's not about, yes, there's still aspects of like managing your money, like you said, the money ball. But if everyone's on the same playing field, then it really comes down to what it should be about. It should be about developing, coaching, and getting better. But right now, how the setup is like you can buy teams. You can buy players if you have the most money, right? Yeah. So like I would much rather prefer a system like the NFL where everyone has the same salary cap. But right now in college athletics, we're far from that.
Well, and what do you think the short-term impact is going to be on the MAC type conferences? You know, they don't have the TV revenue that the Big Ten, the SEC does. And yet, I mean, they're an important aspect of college football. You know, when you look at the transfer portal, they have a lot of good players that come out of those schools, and it would seem to me that they're going to be in jeopardy.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I really feel for programs at that level. FCS and group of 6 programs now, like it's almost impossible to retain your best players because you can't compensate them at the same level as the Power 4 can, and it's nearly impossible for a young man and a family to turn down that much money if you move up to the Power 4. So it's impossible, almost impossible for those schools to keep their best players. Because like I said, then it goes back to like agents want to represent the best players, and agents might be seeking out guys in the Group of 4 level and saying, hey, man, you're doing really well. I could probably get you up to the Power 4 and have a pretty substantial pay increase, right? And that's hard to turn down for young men and their families, and I don't blame them. That's a hard situation.
In terms of things that student athletes should focus on, either in the Group of 4 or the Power 4, it seems like there's a lot of noise out there, but if a player performs well in the field, everything else will probably take care of itself. And I think that's kind of how it always has been. But whether you got a guy at Toledo who's, balling out for a couple years, or you've got a Michigan State athlete who, is steadily improving, working his way up the roster, and, doing all the things the right way. I think, you tell me, that seems to be the thing that student athletes and high school recruits should focus on, especially when they're in the building.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we look at it this way. Like, there's 3 components to it. Like, number 1, we have to know what our budget is, right? Number 2, then it is like, how well do you produce? And everyone produces at a different level, right? Like, not everyone's out there 1,000-yard receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. Like, there's freshmen that aren't doing that but may get there one day, but we can't compensate a freshman the same level that we are someone that's producing at a higher level, right? That just doesn't make sense. That's a bad business model, okay? So yes, there's that element of production. And then after that, and this is important, I kind of touched on it, is like, how well do our players uphold and adhere to the standards of our program, right? Because that's a component of it too, right? Like I said, everything's being evaluated. Yes, on-field performance, but what you're doing in the strength room, nutrition, your sleep. Like, we track a lot of different things. So the more you're clicking on all cylinders in every aspect of the program, the more inclined we are to want to reward you the most we can. At the end of the day, too, is we can't, like I said, we have a budget. So we can't pay everyone maybe what they think their value is. And that's where decisions are tough, is there might be a couple guys that are performing really well, and we may not be able to compensate both of them at the level that maybe they think they're worth or we want to pay them at. And we might have to choose one or the other. And that's not fun, but that's the reality of when you have a budget, there's only so much to go around. And those decisions are really tough.
Does it feel like you're always having to protect your commits or your current players? Yeah, I think we have a quarterback at a BYU that just transferred outside of the transfer portal, and we'll see what happens with that, if there's any legislation or not legislation, if there's any court cases related to that or not. But I know they used to sign a national letter of intent, and I think your commits sign some kind of benefit agreement, but I don't know that it's really binding on them. So does it feel like everyone's trying to poach your good players right up to the camp?
So there is legislation that you can't enter the transfer portal. I think it was, what was the date of it? I want to say it was sometime in the middle of May. That was the last date. So the BYU situation is a little unique. He was actually removed from school because he violated their honor code. So he had a valid reason to be able to enter the transfer portal because he was removed from their team. But they did change the rule to where you have to put your name in the portal. I think it was sometime in the middle of May. But previously, like, we had a situation at Oregon State where it happened to us where they hadn't changed this rule. We lost a guy to Ole Miss, a running back, 5 days before camp because he was about to graduate. And once you were a graduate transfer, then you were eligible to leave once you graduate, back then when the rules, how they were written. So we lost a running back that was going to play for us 5 days before camp. He transferred to Ole Miss, right? But they've changed that rule now to where there's very strict and firm dates for the transfer portal, regardless of if you're an undergraduate or graduate transfer.
So how about new, commits that are going to be freshmen coming in? I mean, right up to camp. I mean, you're really at risk of that, aren't you? Of them leaving or someone else trying to make a better deal for them?
So once they sign an aid agreement, that makes them, we're binded to them at that point. They're still not binded to us. They're not binded to us until they step foot on campus and partake in a class. So in theory, yes, say a guy signs in December and he doesn't enroll until the summer. That young man could get out of that aid agreement because he's not binded to us until he steps foot on campus and takes part in a class. So to answer your question, yes, like with that example, and then just the whole landscape of college football, like we're constantly in a state of paranoia, right? Because we don't know what's going on behind the scenes with our players. And agents or who's reaching out to them saying, hey, we'll give you that if you come to our school. Like there's no way of us knowing unless they tell us. And oftentimes if they're thinking about leaving, they're not going to tell us, right? So yes, we're constantly in a state of paranoia. And that's why in our recruiting department, it's our job to be prepared for that. Like it's our job to have answers. Like our high school boards, our transfer portal boards, they're deep, right? They have to be because we don't know what's going to happen, right? Like I think we have 22 guys committed right now to Michigan State in the 2026 class. I hope all 22 stick with us to December, but the chances of that happening, probably pretty slim. We're probably going to lose a guy or two to a different school throughout the course of the season, right? Yeah. So you always have to be prepared and thinking about what if scenarios of this guy gets picked off by an SEC school, who are we going to next? And that's our job as a recruiting department to have those lists ready. So we're being proactive and not reactive.
Are you looking at guys before they enter the transfer portal at other teams?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So we have a whole element of our recruiting department, personnel department, that is dedicated to college scouting. So that throughout the course of the year, their job is to evaluate and track guys in college, and we build boards off that based on what our needs are, right? And every school across the country is doing the same thing. But really, how it works is throughout the course of the year, especially as we get closer to the transfer portal, like agents, they have their lists of who they're representing, right? And some agents are representing, like there's big agencies out there that are representing, dozens of guys. Those agents are sending those lists to college programs across the country saying, hey, I have this guy at this school. He's not happy. He might be interested in leaving. Are you interested? If you are, what would you be willing to pay him, right? So that's happening throughout the course of the season. And that's where it goes back to how many of our guys are on those lists that are being sent out to other schools, right? So that's where it's a constant state of paranoia. And that's just the landscape we're in now, is that there's so many players out there now that you have this transfer portal, not only high school, junior college, but now all these college programs, Power 4, Group of 6, FCS, D2, D3. Like there's so many players out there, and there's good players across the country at all levels. So you have to be prepared for all those guys that are out there.
So what I'm hearing, though, is you have guys on staff that are getting paid to watch college football.
Yeah.
Sign me up for that one.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly right.
Cole, what's the best way for a high school recruit to get noticed by you guys or to get their tape to you? I know when Brady and AJ were on, they mentioned that when they were in high school, they were sending out hundreds of Twitter DMs and emails all over the place with their film, starting at the D3 level and going on up. So is that really the best way to get in touch with you guys? Is just
that's a great way, especially to our recruiting and personnel staff. Because oftentimes, if you DM a coach, like our coaches have so much going on, and some of them are tracking their DMs and Twitters occasionally, but a lot of them they're so busy they're not doing that. So the best way to get in touch with a college football program is really to reach out to the recruiting and the personnel staff, because that's our job, is to constantly be looking for players, right? So often if you DM someone in a college recruiting or personnel staff, we're going to look into that. Like if I get a DM from a guy, I'm going to look at his film, at least the first couple plays, and say, hey, this guy has a chance or he doesn't. And if he does, we're going to continue to investigate, right? So, yes, that is a good way. But then another way, too, is we rely heavily on camps and then in-person evaluations. And then anytime we get guys on our campus, that's the best way for us to evaluate. Because a big component of it is getting, like, verified measurables, right? Like a lot of times on Twitter or Huddle, like, a guy will say he's 6'4", but he shows up to our campus and he's 6'2". Like that's a big discrepancy, right?
Yeah.
That's what I tried to do.
Yep. So guys, like it's gonna be really critical, like for during our season. Like we have 6 home games this year, and we're gonna invite guys to come to our campus to watch the games, right? and they have a meal with us, and they're at the game, they're partaking in that experience. But it's a chance for us to get eyes on them, interact with them, and we're watching all those guys before they come to the game. So we have an idea already of who these guys are. But there's nothing like an in-person evaluation. Then lastly is the camps. Like there's really good players everywhere, right? And we want to focus in on a 6-hour radius from East Lansing. But there's a chance there's a kid from Florida that we may really like on tape. But to further that evaluation, we want to look at like if he has camp footage, because a lot of the best players in the country, they're going to camps. Under Armour camps, Nike combines, where they're getting verified testing data and verified measurables. And we subscribe to services that film that footage, so then we can watch that. And that's a huge piece of the puzzle too.
And as part of that, are you also recruiting families to see, are they going to be a good fit with us, and is there going to be issues there? Yeah,
that's a great point. Like it's a two-way street, right? Like when we have a young man on unofficial visit or official visit, like yes, they're evaluating us, but we're evaluating them too, right? Because parents are involved, and oftentimes you can get a really good feel for a young man, and maybe they're predicting their future success or how they're going to be by how their parents are or how they interact as a family, right? Like there's a lot of cases where a family and a young man come on a campus, and like we're completely sold based on our interaction with them and how they conduct themselves over the course of a 48-hour official visit. We're all in on this family and this young man. And we say that a lot, like we love his parents, we love his family. Like if that's how his family is, that's how the young man's going to be, right? But there's a flip side to that too. Like if we have an official visit or unofficial visit and maybe things aren't going so well, or we observe things that we're like, oh, make us pause, right? Like yes, that's a big part of the equation, because at the end of the day, you're not recruiting just the student athlete, you're recruiting their family, right? Because the family has to be on board with the decision as well.
Who do you got to convince first? Is it mom?
Usually mom. usually mom is first. Yep. But it just depends on each guy's family dynamic. But yeah, usually if mom's in the picture, she's involved.
Cole, how's the team looking?
Good. Excited. We get started here on Monday is a report day for fall camp, and then Tuesday's our first practice. So you never really know till the bullets start flying, but I feel, and if you ask anyone in our building, much better about where we're at going into year 2, just in terms of everything, where our roster is, where our culture is. We're just way more familiar with our players, and they're more familiar with us, and there's just a more sense of comfort, and I think an eagerness and a hungerness to all start attacking this second year together under Coach Smith, and really prove what we think we can do against the best competition there is in the Big Ten. So we're excited. I know our guys are, and it's coming here quick.
Nice.
Well, we'll definitely be following. We thank you so much for joining us today, and I want to echo what Charlie said. We've both had the opportunity to work with you, and you're really a pleasure to work with, and so we appreciate that, and look forward to working with you in the future. And hopefully you'll come back again and give us an update, maybe of how things are going under the revenue sharing plan and what it looks like in the future. So thanks so much.
Yeah, no, appreciate you guys having me on, and I think this is a big part of just getting this kind of stuff out there to help educate people, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's cool, this platform that you guys have for people to come on and talk about their area of where they work. And I've seen a couple of you guys do a wide range of people that you bring on here, so it's pretty cool, and I'm excited to keep following your show.
Yeah. Great. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Cole.
Okay. Thank you guys. Cool.